Loosening the purse strings after years of austerity, the Chancellor delivers his last budget before Brexit. Philip Hammond says he'll cut taxes early for millions and pump more money into public services. But Labour say the tough times aren't over yet.
I can report to the British people that their hard work is paying off and the era of austerity is finally coming to an end.
The reality is that whatever the Chancellor claims today, austerity is not over.
We'll tell you what it means for hospitals, schools and businesses and how they propose to pay for it. Also on the programme tonight, family and football stars paid tribute at the Leicester Stadium where the club's owner died in a helicopter crash. The shy 5-year-old comforted by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex on their royal tour.
From Westminster, this is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. The Chancellor today claimed the era of austerity is coming to an end. In his budget, there was more money for the NHS, defence, counter-terrorism, even cash to fill in potholes. He also told MPs here that he had found money to alleviate the problems of universal credit. But despite it being the last budget before Brexit, there was little mention of that. Instead, Mr Hammond spent his time talking of tax cuts for workers and increases in public spending. Labour responded, saying the Chancellor's announcements were an admission that austerity had failed. They described it as a broken promise budget. With the details, here's our political correspondent, Romley Weeks.
The Chancellor's political demise has been predicted almost as often as his neighbours in number 10. But even he can't be expecting to do this many more times. And the Prime Minister hasn't made this budget easy for him, promising an end to austerity, raising expectations of a giveaway in this red box and setting a tricky political tightrope for a Chancellor not known for his largesse. But as he set off for his date before MPs, he does have bigger than expected tax receipts in his pocket, and his message was unmissable.
I can report to the British people that their hard work is paying off and the era of austerity is finally coming to an end.
Despite the economy's sluggish growth, borrowing will be lower than forecast, giving the Chancellor some wriggle room and the chance to crack a joke perhaps best kept to himself.
So, Mr Deputy Speaker, Fiscal Phil says fiscal rules OK.
In a budget that had been much leaked, Mr Hammond joked most of his big announcements had been announced for him, including £20 billion a year for the NHS, £2 billion of which will be ring-fenced for mental health services. Authorities in England will get an additional £650 million for social care next year. There'll be an extra £1 billion for defence to combat cybercrime and support the nuclear deterrent. Schools will get a one-off payment of £400 million this year. He also announced a new digital tax on tech giants such as Facebook and Google, who turn over more than £500 million a year. And the government's welfare reform, Universal Credit, gets £1 billion over the next 5 years to help smooth the rocky rollout of the scheme. And there was rates relief for public loos. Cue some more bad jokes.
And honestly, Mr Deputy Speaker, I can say that this is virtually the only announcement in this budget that hasn't leaked.
There were some surprises, leaping onto Labour's territory by abandoning PFI, Public Finance Initiative schemes, and he found cash to raise the tax-free personal allowance earlier than promised.
A tax cut for 32 million people. £130 in the pocket of a typical basic rate taxpayer.
There was a fleeting admission that a no-deal Brexit might mean a new budget in the spring, but even on Brexit, this was the Chancellor at his most positive.
Get it right, and we will not only protect Britain's jobs, businesses and prosperity, but we will also harvest a double deal dividend. A boost from the end of uncertainty and a boost from releasing some of the fiscal headroom that I am holding in reserve at the moment.
He ended with a claim that he'd squared what some suggest is an impossible circle.
Austerity is coming to an end, but discipline will remain. And that is the clear dividing line in British politics today.
Labour's reaction: you've got to be joking.
The Prime Minister pledged austerity is over. This, Mr Deputy Speaker, is a broken promise budget. What we've heard today are half measures and quick fixes while austerity grinds on. And far from people's hard work and sacrifices having paid off, as the Chancellor claims, this government has frittered it away in ideological tax cuts to the richest in our society.
If there's one winner from this budget, it's the NHS, but in other public services it might be hard to spot the end of austerity. Our future post-Brexit is less than certain, and so are the country's finances. Romilly Weeks, ITV News, Westminster.
OK, so let's get the thoughts now of our economics editor, Joel Hills, who's in central London tonight. Now, Joel, the Chancellor's turning the spending taps back on, isn't he, a bit, talking about the age of austerity coming to an end. And he says he's got enough in the bank now, even if there is no deal Brexit. Do his numbers add up, do you think?
Well, his claim to have ended austerity is an opinion rather than an absolute fact, and he certainly isn't as being anywhere near as generous as he suggested in the Commons. In his speech, he said that public spending from next year will rise by 1.2% year on year in real terms when adjusted for inflation. But the bulk of all that extra funding will be going to the NHS in England. Other government departments, in real terms, over the next 5 years, won't be any better off. Their budgets will be largely frozen. And actually, in 5 years' time, when you look at public service spending as relative to the size of the economy, it'll be much lower than it was before austerity began. But look, there is more money available. Where's he getting it from? Well, he's letting borrowing take the strain. Go back 8 years to when the austerity programme, all those spending cuts were announced. It was to deal with borrowing, which had soared to £153 billion a year. It has since fallen very sharply. The OBR thinks that the Chancellor will only be borrowing £25 billion this year. He would be borrowing an awful lot less. Tax receipts have been much stronger than forecast just 6 months ago, but the Chancellor has decided to spend the windfall. It's enabled him to make the claim that he's ended austerity without raising taxes. Unfortunately for him, the OBR calculates that he's on target to miss a key manifesto pledge to balance the books by the middle of the next decade.
It's not formally abandoned, it's still mentioned in the Treasury documentation, but if you look at the end of the forecast, having spent the fiscal windfall, he's still got a budget deficit of about £20 billion a year in 5 years' time, and he only then has another 2 years to hit that target. So we've judged that on this basis he's not yet on course to do that.
Look, Brexit will have an impact on the public finances. The OBR is waiting to see what Brexit means before it decides what that is. The Chancellor was saying in the Commons that if we get a deal, we're in for even more largesse and generosity. If we don't get a deal, of course, the results will be profoundly negative.
OK, Joel Hills in the city there, thank you. So plenty of other details in the Chancellor's budget. Let's take a look. There was an extra £160 million for counter-terror policing. More than £400 million for minor roadworks, including dealing with potholes. He also announced a new £650 million fund to help struggling high streets, as well as cutting business rates for smaller shops, cafes and pubs. There was help for first-time home buyers, with stamp duty abolished on shared ownership properties up to £500,000. A new tax will be introduced on the import of packaging made of less than 30% recycled material. The national living wage will increase from £7.83 to more than £8.20 an hour from next April. And duty on fuel, spirits, beer and cider will be frozen, but increased on wine and cigarettes. Now, one of the more eye-catching announcements is the £2 billion which is going to be spent on mental health services in England. It's all part of the extra £20 billion the NHS will receive annually by 2023, which was already announced, you might remember, back in June. Now, our health correspondent Emily Morgan is at Ipswich Hospital. Emily, what's been the reaction there?
Well, it's been broadly welcomed here. As you say, it's no secret that the NHS was going to get an extra £20 billion by 2023. The detail we got today is how some of that money is going to be spent. And as you say, £2 billion will be spent on mental health services. So every large A&E department in England will get extra support for mental health patients. There'll be extra investment in communities, and crisis teams will go into schools. I think it's a clear sign that the government wants mental health funding to be on a par with physical health funding, although some charities have come out to say it's simply not enough. It needs to be double the £2 billion. The Chancellor also announced more money for adult social care, so £650 million next year will go to local authorities for that. Think tanks say that's a short-term fix, and the chief executive here at this hospital in Ipswich says there needs to be better funding in areas like that in order for the £20 billion in the NHS to be enough.
If there's pressure in social care, we know inevitably that puts a pressure on the NHS. So that's why the conversations we're having isn't about where we invest necessarily in different organisations, it's where we invest as a system. More money may need to go into social care, but that has to be found from somewhere else. We know that we often have 100 patients who are stranded in hospital on this site, who need social care packages, who are delayed.
Well, the Chancellor reminded us there'll be a green paper on social care in the coming weeks. The NHS will announce its 10-year plan, but unless there's a significant shift in the way services work together, there will always be people who will say that the NHS simply needs more money.
Emily Morgan in Norfolk, thank you very much indeed. Now, the Chancellor announced a number of changes which will help our pockets. Top among them, an increase in the amount that can be earned before paying tax, effectively meaning a tax cut for many. But there was also a number of other changes, including to business rates and other allowances. Our consumer editor Chris Choi has been in Hull, finding out how the budget will affect all of us.
A Britain open for business was the Chancellor's budget message, and Hull physically embodies that. But he promised a people's budget, and here the people aren't sure whether they got it. This is the DeLuca family, helped by the new £12,500 personal tax allowance. With 2 cars, the fuel duty freeze helps, and Mum Claire works in primary schools now, each getting a £10,000 bonus.
I think it's good news in one sense that they have acknowledged that schools need money, primary schools in particular. But on the other hand, £10,000, is it going to even touch the sides? You know, and it's not ring-fenced for any certain project.
Osara Otobo is unsure whether a new £500 million fund will help her onto the housing ladder. She questions whether the new £37 million transport investment for the north is enough. And she appreciates the new 26 to 30 rail card, but says more should be done for the young.
I do feel like young people feel like they don't have it as good as their parents and grandparents, and it's so frustrating. And we do try to work hard, but when there's not enough support from the government behind that, that just makes things even harder.
As a retailer, Andrew Taylor benefits from a 1/3 cut in his business rate. He welcomes the new digital services tax on internet giants and has concerns over a new tax on plastic packaging.
The sugar tax is still relatively new, and to follow that up now with the plastic tax, it's just something else for the industry. Who's going to judge what plastic's taxed? And you know, if you look around the shop, there's plastic everywhere, and plastic packaging is a massive part of the industry. So it's going to be really interesting to find out what gets taxed and what gets left alone.
As a launchpad towards Brexit and the end of austerity, this budget had a big job. Here, the debate over whether it turned out to be more trick than treat is tonight underway. Chris Choi, ITV News, Hull.
Well, political editor Robert Peston is here. Chilly, isn't it, Robert? Now, the Chancellor clearly wants us to believe that this signals the end of austerity, but does it, do you think?
Well, yes, I would agree that that era of really savage cuts is now a thing of the past. We had 8 years of the police force being shrunk very significantly. I mean, the cuts to local councils almost unbelievably big. Now, the Chancellor has said we will see annual rises after adjusting for inflation of at least 1.2% every year. If you strip out the promises they've already made to put much more money into the health service, that broadly means the rest of government gets a freeze. That's still better than where we were before, but it won't feel like, we're freezing here today, it won't feel like summer to other departments. So there's still going to be a massive punch-up between ministers to get their hands on what resources are available. And the other thing is that the Chancellor has said that if Brexit plans go the way they hope, if we get the right kind of deal, there would be more money. So yes, it is the end of Brexit, but we are not going to see a bonanza.
Austerity, not Brexit.
Sorry, not Brexit. Austerity, definitely, but we're not going to see a bonanza. One other tiny thing, very briefly, these tax cuts they've announced today, they seem to me to be very interesting, because normally, with an election not due to 2022, you wouldn't make tax cuts at this stage of the cycle, so maybe they think the election's going to be a little bit earlier.
All right, Robert, thank you very much indeed. Still to come on the ITV Evening News, the family of Leicester City's billionaire owner lays wreaths at the site of Saturday's helicopter crash as fans and football stars pay tribute. That and more of the day's news after the break. Hello again, welcome back. The wife and son of the Leicester City chairman today added to the growing pile of tributes left outside the stadium where his helicopter crashed on Saturday. Vishai Srivatanaprabha was killed alongside the pilot, co-pilot and 2 members of his staff. This afternoon, Leicester's first team led fans and family members in a round of applause, many of them clearly very emotional. From the stadium, Stacey Foster reports.
Vishai Srivatanaprabha's son walked out onto the pitch at the King Power Stadium to pay tribute to his father. A lone wreath inside an empty stadium on the spot where the chairman's helicopter took off on Saturday night. A footballing family mourning the loss of the man who dared them to dream. Supporting the son of Vishai Srivatanaprabha, Leicester City stars joined fans outside the ground to pay their respects. But on the other side of this stadium is the wreckage of the tragedy that's devastated this family and this community. On Saturday night, moments after the helicopter took off, it came down near to the car park. Former England goalkeeper Peter Shilton saw what happened.
It just crashed and loud bang, and we realised, it was real. It was kind of surreal to start with, and then it was real. And the sort of flames, little sparks came out the back, and then flames, and then bigger flames, and then it just exploded.
Vishai Srivatanaprabha was the driving force behind Leicester City's miracle Premier League title in 2016. He was awarded a degree by the University of Leicester for his commitment to the football club and to the city.
I promise to do all my best for our Leicester.
It's just overwhelming, really. I mean, this just shows it, don't it? But
it's just so sad that this lovely man that's just given this city just so much, positivity is gone, and that's just so sad, and just feel so sorry for his family.
It's going to take an awful long time for this club, for this city to recover from this devastating blow.
Alongside the chairman and his 2 members of staff, pilot Eric Swaffer and his partner Isabel Lekovic also died in Saturday's tragedy. Investigators say they've now recovered the black box recorder, but it'll be days before they can establish what happened. Tonight, a club and a community is coming to terms with such a huge loss. Stacey Foster, ITV News, Leicester.
A former soldier was able to shoot dead his former wife and her mother despite repeated warnings to police. Today, Craig Savage was jailed for a minimum of 38 years. His ex-wife, Michelle, had reported threats made to her twice, the latest being just weeks before he shot the pair dead at their East Sussex home. The moment was caught on a distressing 999 call, as Martha Fairley reports.
Hands are up in the air.
On a beach, surrounded and standing next to the stolen rifle he used to kill his ex-wife and her mother, Craig Savage is arrested by armed police. Earlier that evening, CCTV shows the 35-year-old ex-soldier had calmly entered a house in St Leonard's carrying the semi-automatic weapon. Ignoring pleas for mercy, he shot his wife Michelle 7 times, her mother 6 times, and then shot her dog. Her pregnant sister, hiding in the building, called 999.
Sussex Police, what's your emergency?
My sister's crazy ex has just smashed through the window shooting.
Your sister's ex-partner?
My sister's ex, he's already been reported, it is on file.
I didn't go there to kill him, it was me that was supposed to die. It was me that was supposed to die, not them.
Under arrest, Savage claimed he'd planned to kidnap Michelle and provoke police to shoot him.
I wanted to die.
But in the month before her death, Michelle told police she feared for her life, twice reporting her ex's threatening behaviour.
The forensic evidence showed that he discharged multiple shots. He also took the opportunity to reload that firearm, which clearly rebutted his defence that this was an accident.
Sentencing Savage to life, Mrs Justice McGowan told him he had an obsessive and controlling personality, warning he may never be released. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
In other news, fracking has been halted once again in Lancashire after another small tremor. It is the third time the contractor Quadrilla has had to stop drilling in the last week. The latest tremor measured 1.1 on the Richter scale, the strongest since fracking began a fortnight ago. And finally, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have been showing off their readiness for parenthood in New Zealand. While meeting a group of children in Wellington, Meghan spotted 5-year-old Joe Young, who was suddenly overcome with shyness. The Duchess got down on her knees to coax something from the schoolboy before Harry attempted a slightly more direct approach. Later, the couple headed to the rainforest where Harry thanked their host on behalf of all the royal family.
Myself and my wife, we are so grateful to be here. We bring blessings from my grandmother.
The day ended with a return to the Duchess's acting roots as they met young stars of the future. When confronted by a couple of the characters from the Lord of the Rings films, though, the Duchess looked more than a little hesitant. And that is it for now. Tom Bradby's back with news at 10, but from me and all the team, have a very good evening. Bye-bye.